Anime Autopsy here, and I need to talk to you about a lie. Not a small lie. Not a, oh, Oda forgot to draw Zoro's scar on the correct eye kind of lie. I am talking about a 600-chapter-long psychological operation conducted by a man in Japan against millions of readers worldwide, and we all fell for it. Every single one of us. We looked at Bartholomew Kuma. We saw the word Tyrant attached to his name. We watched him slap pirates into next week with those giant paw-padded hands, and we said, yes, this is clearly a bad guy. We are all clowns. Certified clowns. And today, over the next 2 hours, I am going to walk you through exactly how fictional pirate creator man played us like a fiddle, and why the so-called Tyrant of the Shichibukai is actually the saddest, most self-sacrificing character in the entire One Piece canon. Get comfortable. Get your tissues. This is going to hurt. The first time we hear the name Bartholomew Kuma is not at Thriller Bark. This is a common misconception. No. Fictional pirate creator man is far too meticulous for that. The name drops during the Jaya arc, chapter 233, when we are getting our first real education on what the Shichibukai actually are. And what does the world government tell us about Kuma? They call him the Tyrant, not Bartholomew Kuma, nice guy, loves his daughter, reads the Bible on Sundays. They brand him with the most terrifying epithet they can manage. And here is the thing about epithets in One Piece that I need you to understand before we go any further. Epithets are almost always lies, or at minimum, they are incomplete pictures designed to serve a narrative. Pirate hunter. Zoro does not hunt pirates anymore. Cat burglar. Nami has not committed a burglary in years. Dark King Rayleigh is one of the most jovial old men in the entire story. Oda uses epithets as misdirection, and Tyrant is perhaps the greatest misdirection in the entire manga. But we did not know that in chapter 233. We heard Tyrant, and we filed Kuma away in the scary villain drawer of our mind brains, and we moved on with our lives. Then came Thriller Bark, and our perception solidified into concrete. Chapter 473. The Straw Hats have just finished the single most grueling battle of their pre-time skip careers. Moria is down, Oars is down, everyone is bleeding, broken and running on fumes. And then a Shichibukai shows up, not just any Shichibukai. The one with the reputation for being an unstoppable government weapon. The Tyrant himself carrying a Bible like some kind of apocalyptic messenger. And what does he do? He starts asking questions. Weird questions. He asks Moria about the caliber of the Straw Hat crew. He asks if they could potentially defeat Moria. He is taking notes, folks. This man showed up to a disaster zone with a clipboard and started conducting a performance review. Now, at the time, we all thought this was Kuma sizing up a potential threat. The world government is worried about Luffy, so they sent their robot man to evaluate the danger level. Standard villain behaviour. Case closed. Except no. That is exactly what Oda wanted us to think. Because if you go back to chapter 485, with the knowledge we now have from the Egghead arc, the entire scene transforms. Kuma was not there to evaluate a threat. He was there to confirm a hope. He was checking if Monkey D. Luffy, the grandson of Garp, the son of Dragon, the inheritor of Shanks's hat, was worthy of being the vessel for Nika. Kuma, a buccaneer who grew up hearing the legend of the sun god, who survived God Valley by believing in that legend, who passed that faith to his daughter, was running a job interview for a prophecy. And what happens next in that Thriller Bark sequence is the most important character introduction in One Piece that nobody recognised as important. Kuma offers the Straw Hats a deal. Hand over Luffy's head, and everyone else walks free. Now, think about this for a second using your emotional maths. If Kuma actually wanted Luffy dead, if he was a genuine threat, why would he offer a deal at all? He had just demonstrated that he could vaporize anyone in the vicinity with a single touch. He could have taken Luffy's head himself with zero resistance. The entire crew was incapacitated. Zoro could barely stand. Sanji was running on willpower alone. Kuma was holding all the cards, and he chose to negotiate. Because he was not there to kill anyone. He was there to test them. He wanted to see what kind of people surrounded the potential sun god. Would they sell out their captain to save themselves? Would they crumble under pressure? Or would they stand and fight a battle they had absolutely no chance of winning? And then Zoro happened. Chapter 485, The Legendary Panel. Zoro offers his own head instead of Luffy's. He offers his dream, his life, everything, just so his captain can continue. And Kuma's response to this, he does not take Zoro's head. Instead, he extracts all of Luffy's pain and fatigue, every ounce of damage from the Moria fight, and he offers Zoro a different deal. Take this pain into your own body. If you survive, I leave. If you die, well, at least you died for something. And Zoro takes it. Nothing happened, he says, standing in a pool of his own blood, pretending he is fine. And Kuma walks away. Now here is the detail that breaks my brain every time I think about it. Kuma did not have to do any of that. He could have left after seeing the crew's resolve. Test passed, prophecy candidates confirmed, mission accomplished. But he went further. He removed the pain that would have killed Luffy and gave it to someone who could bear it. He ensured the future sun god would not only survive, but would have a crew loyal enough to die for him. Kuma was not being cruel to Zoro. He was forging something. He was tempering the Straw Hat crew in fire, because he knew what they would eventually need to become. This is not the behavior of a tyrant. This is the behavior of a man who has seen the future and is desperately trying to give humanity a fighting chance. And the Bible. Let us talk about the Bible for a second, because fictional pirate creator man does not include props without reason. Kuma is the only character in One Piece who carries a Bible. Not a bounty poster, not a weapon, a Bible. At Thriller Bark, in every appearance, that book is with him. Now we know from the Egghead flashbacks that Kuma was raised in a church, that he was a man of profound faith, that he genuinely believed in the sun god Nika as a source of hope and liberation. That Bible is not decoration. It is his connection to everything he believes in. And he carries it while working as a government weapon, because even while his body serves the world government, his soul serves something else entirely. The tyrant was a priest. The monster was a saint. And we had no idea. So that is the foundation. That is chapter 1 of why everything you thought you knew about Bartholomew Kuma is wrong. Thriller Bark was not a villain introduction. It was a guardian angel making first contact with the people who would one day carry his faith forward. But Thriller Bark was just the beginning. Because what Kuma does next, at Sabaody Archipelago, is even more insane when you understand the context. He does not just save the Straw Hats. He sends them to exactly where they need to be. And that level of precision is not luck, folks. That is planning. That is a man who knew the future and spent his final moments of free will making sure the right pieces were in place. But we will get to that. First, let me tell you about the so-called random destinations of the Straw Hat separation. Sabaody Archipelago. Chapter 512 through 513. This is where the entire fandom collectively lost their minds, and rightfully so. The Straw Hat crew, the protagonists we had followed for over 500 chapters, got absolutely demolished. Not by a villain, not by a rival crew, by an admiral who was not even trying particularly hard, and a Shichibukai who we still believed was the enemy. Kizaru showed up moving at the speed of light. Sentomaru brought the Pacifista units, and suddenly our heroes were facing a battle they could not possibly win. Luffy, for the first time in the story, had to confront the reality that his crew was going to die, and there was nothing he could do about it. It remains one of the most emotionally devastating sequences in the entire manga. and fictional pirate creator man executed it with surgical precision. But here is where the narrative gets delicious, folks. In the middle of this absolute catastrophe, Kuma appears. Same stoic face, same giant frame, same paw pads. And he starts doing something that, on the surface, looks like the most villainous thing possible. He touches the straw hats one by one, and they vanish. Poof. Gone. Zoro first, then Brook, then Usopp, and so on down the line until only Luffy remains, screaming in despair as he watches his entire crew disappear before his eyes. "I couldn't save a single one of them," he says, and it is genuinely heartbreaking. The protagonist has failed completely. The adventure is over. Roll credits. Except no. Because what looked like an execution was actually an evacuation. And not just any evacuation. This was a precision-targeted relocation operation that should be studied in military academies if military academies existed for fictional pirates. Let me break down where each straw hat ended up, and I want you to pay very close attention to the specificity here, because this is where your mind brain should start tingling. Luffy lands on Amazon Lily, the island of warrior women ruled by Boa Hancock, a former slave of the Celestial Dragons who has a direct connection to the Kuja pirates, and more importantly, to Rayleigh. Zoro lands on Kuraigana Island, the exact location of Dracula Mihawk, the single greatest swordsman alive, the one man who can push Zoro's abilities to the next level. Nami lands on Witheria, a sky island populated entirely by weather scientists who can teach her advanced climatology and meteorological combat. Usopp lands on the Boan archipelago, a dangerous island that forces him to become physically stronger while also providing him with new ammunition types and botanical weapons. Sanji lands on Momowaro Island, the Kamabaka Kingdom, where Ivankov's people will torture him into learning the secret recipes of attack cuisine, while also pushing his physical limits through constant combat. And it continues. Chopper lands on Torino Kingdom, an island with some of the most advanced medicinal knowledge in the world, populated by giant birds and scholars who can expand his pharmaceutical expertise. Robin lands on Tequila Wolf, a bridge built by slaves which directly connects her to the Revolutionary Army and eventually leads her to Dragon himself. Frankie lands on Karakuri Island, Vegapunk's homeland, where he discovers the scientist's old laboratory and gains access to technology that will let him upgrade the Sunnian himself. Brook lands on Namakura Island, which seems random until you realise the cultists there have a connection to the underworld that eventually helps him become the Soul King and rejoin the crew. Now, I need you to sit with this information for a moment, because either this is the greatest coincidence in the history of fiction, or Kuma knew exactly where every single straw hat needed to go. And I do not believe in coincidences, especially not when fictional pirate creator man is involved. The odds of randomly sending 9 people to 9 perfect training destinations is so astronomically low that suggesting it was luck is actually insulting to basic probability. Kuma did not scatter the straw hats. He deployed them. He had a map in his head, and he executed a 2-year training program in the span of about 30 seconds. But here is the question that should be eating at you right now. How did he know? How did Bartholomew Kuma, a Shichibukai working for the world government, know that Mihawk was on Kuraigana Island? How did he know about Witheria, a sky island that does not exactly advertise its location? How did he know that Vegapunk's old lab was on Karakuri Island and that it contained the blueprints Frankie would need? The answer, and this is where the cockery gets real, is that Kuma had access to information he should not have had. He was a Revolutionary Army commander before he was a Shichibukai. He worked directly with Dragon. He had connections to Ivankov, who runs the Kamabaka Kingdom. And most importantly, he had been to Egghead Island and worked with Vegapunk himself. Kuma was not just a government weapon. He was a double agent operating at the highest possible level, and the Sabaody separation was his final mission. Think about the timing here, because the timing is crucial. Kuma's deal with the world government, the one where he agreed to become a full pacifista with no free will, had a deadline. He was losing pieces of himself with every modification. By the time of Sabaody, he was running on borrowed time, and he knew it. The next modification would be the last. His personality, his memories, his ability to make choices, all of it would be erased. So what does a dying man do when he has one last chance to act? He makes it count. He does not just save the Straw Hats from Kizaru. He sets them up for the next 2 years of their lives. He gives them the exact tools they will need to survive the new world. And there is one more detail that makes this even more devastating. The last thing Kuma does at Sabaody, after sending the Straw Hats away, is program himself to protect the Thousand Sunny for 2 years, without rest, without payment, without even the ability to remember why he was doing it. He stands guard over a ship, taking damage from anyone who approaches, for 730 days. When the Straw Hats return post-time skip, Frankie finds Kuma on the Sunny, barely functional, covered in damage, having fought off countless enemies while the crew was away, and Kuma does not even recognize them. His mind is gone. The man who saved them, who planned their training, who gave up everything, does not remember any of it. This is not tyrant behavior. This is martyr behavior. This is a man committing suicide in slow motion across years, carving off pieces of his soul one chunk at a time, and using every remaining moment of agency to protect people he believes in. And we missed it. We watched these scenes when they first came out and we thought, oh, weird, the robot man is malfunctioning. Or, I guess Kuma has some kind of programming quirk. We did not understand that we were watching a tragedy unfold in real time. Fictional pirate creator man showed us a saint dying for his beliefs, and we were too busy worrying about the time skip to notice. The Sabaody separation is the turning point. It is the moment where, in retrospect, everything about Kuma changes. Before Sabaody, you can maybe convince yourself that Kuma is just a weird antagonist with unclear motivations. After Sabaody, once you know the truth, every single action he takes is obviously painfully the action of a hero. He sent Luffy to the one person who could teach him haki and connect him to Rayleigh. He sent Zoro to the one person who could make him strong enough to fight admirals. He sent Robin directly to the Revolutionary Army where she could learn the secrets of the Void Century. These are not the moves of a government lapdog. These are the moves of a man playing four-dimensional chess against the world government while pretending to be their pawn. And the most heartbreaking part, he never got to see if it worked. By the time the Straw Hats reunited, stronger than ever, ready to take on the new world, Kuma was already gone. The man who made it all possible was standing on a ship he did not recognize, guarding people he could not remember, running on nothing but the ghost of a promise. But we are getting ahead of ourselves, because to truly understand why Kuma made these choices, why he was willing to sacrifice everything, we need to go back, way back, before the Shichibukai, before the Revolutionary Army, before Dragon and Vegapunk and all of it. We need to go to a place called God Valley, where a little boy learned about a sun god who would one day set the world free. And we need to meet a girl named Ginny, who would change everything. Marineford, the Paramount War. Chapter 550 through 580. This is, by most accounts, the single most important arc in One Piece before the time skip. Whitebeard dies. Ace dies. The entire power structure of the world shifts. And somewhere in that chaos, standing among the Shichibukai, is Bartholomew Kuma. Silent, motionless, empty. And nobody talks about it, which is insane to me. Because what we are witnessing at Marineford is a funeral that nobody realized was happening. Let me set the scene properly, because the context matters. The Shichibukai are assembled at Marineford as part of the world government's military response to Whitebeard's invasion. Mihawk is there, looking bored and eventually leaving because he refuses to fight Shanks. Hancock is there, secretly helping Luffy because she is down catastrophically bad for the rubber boy. Doflamingo is there, being Doflamingo, which means causing chaos and laughing like a maniac. Moria is there, being useless as per usual. And Kuma is there, just standing, not speaking, not reacting. When the other Shichibukai engage in combat or make snide remarks, Kuma does nothing. When Luffy, the same Luffy he protected at Thriller Bark and saved at Sabaody, charges across the battlefield screaming for his brother, Kuma does not move to intercept him. He does not move to help him either. He is a statue, a machine running a program that no longer includes independent thought. This is the first time we see Kuma post-final modification, and it is horrifying when you understand what you are looking at. The man who carried a Bible everywhere, who quoted scripture to Moria, who made philosophical observations about the nature of travel and freedom, has been reduced to a remote-controlled weapon. Doflamingo even comments on it during the war, laughing about how Kuma used to be a fearsome pirate and is now just a government puppet. And Doflamingo, for all his faults, is not wrong. The Kuma at Marineford is not Kuma. It is PX0 wearing Kuma's body like a suit. But here is what breaks me about the Marineford sequence, and I need you to really sit with this. Kuma is present for Ace's execution. He is present when Akainu punches a hole through Ace's chest. He is present when Luffy, the boy he identified as the potential sun god, suffers the most traumatic experience of his life, and Kuma cannot do anything. Not because he chooses not to, because the capacity to choose has been surgically removed from his brain. Imagine, for a moment, being trapped in your own body, watching the person you sacrificed everything for experience unimaginable pain, and being physically incapable of helping. That is Kuma at Marineford. That is the Tyrant's final appearance before he becomes nothing more than a flesh puppet for the Celestial Dragons. And fictional pirate creator man makes sure we feel the absence. There is a panel during the war, I forget the exact chapter, but it is burned into my memory, where Kuma is shown in the background while chaos unfolds in the foreground. He is just there. No dialogue, no action, no reaction. In a war filled with screaming and explosions and the deaths of legends, Kuma is a void. And that void is intentional. Oda is showing us what the world government does to people. They do not just kill you. They erase you. They take everything that makes you human, and they leave the shell behind as a reminder to others of what disobedience costs. Kuma's silence at Marineford is louder than any scream. Now, the timeline gets a little murky here, and I want to be transparent about where the canon gets fuzzy, and where I am engaging in some light cockery. We know from the Egghead flashbacks that Kuma's final modification, the one that removed his personality entirely, happened at some point after Sabaody, but before Marineford. The exact date is not specified. What we do know is that Kuma negotiated for time. He made deals with Vegapunk and Saturn to delay the final procedure so he could complete certain tasks, including the Straw Hat separation and the Sunny protection protocol. By Marineford, those deals had expired. The grace period was over. The man was gone, and only the machine remained. But here is a thought that keeps me up at night, and this is pure speculation, so take it with the appropriate grain of salt. What if some fragment of Kuma was still in there at Marineford? Not enough to act, not enough to speak, but enough to see. The Nikyu no Mi, Kuma's devil fruit, has the ability to push abstract concepts out of people. Pain, fatigue, memories. We see this explicitly during the Thriller Bark arc, when he removes Luffy's accumulated damage. But pushing things out implies that they go somewhere. They do not just vanish into the ether. When Kuma pushed Luffy's pain into Zoro, the pain was transferred, not destroyed. So, where did Kuma push his own memories when Vegapunk was removing his personality? We now know the answer from Egghead. He stored them. He created a bubble, a repository of everything he was, and he hid it somewhere safe for someone to find later. Which means that even as Kuma's body stood motionless at Marineford, his soul might have already been preserved elsewhere, waiting for the daughter he did all of this for. The Marineford appearance is the death of Bartholomew Kuma as a person, but it is not the end of his story. It is the beginning of the ghost phase. From Marineford until Egghead, Kuma exists only as a body. He is rented out to the celestial dragons as a slave, a riding animal for the people he spent his entire life fighting against. He is shown at the Reverie, being ridden by a world noble, and the fandom collectively lost their minds with rage. How dare they do this to a Shichibukai? How dare they humiliate a former warlord? But we did not understand yet. We did not know that the humiliation was always the point. The world government did not make Kuma a slave because they needed a mount. They made him a slave because they wanted to demonstrate what happens to Buccaneers. They wanted to show the world that no matter how strong you become, no matter how valuable you make yourself, if you are born with the sin of the Buccaneer bloodline, you will end up on your knees. And this is where we need to go backward in time, folks. Because Marineford is not the beginning of Kuma's tragedy. It is the middle. The wound was opened decades earlier on an island that no longer exists, during an event that the world government tried to erase from history. God Valley, the birthplace of the revolutionary spirit, the death site of Rox D. Zebek, and the childhood hell of a little boy who would one day become the Tyrant. To understand why Kuma sacrificed everything, we need to understand what was taken from him first. We need to see the chains before we can appreciate the man who broke them. So let us go back. Back before Dragon. Back before Ginny. Back to a slave camp where children whispered about a sun god who would come to save them, and one of those children was big enough to carry the weight of that hope. Chapter 1095. This is where fictional pirate creator man decided that we had not cried enough and needed to be emotionally devastated on a molecular level. Because God Valley is not just a flashback. It is a horror movie. It is a concentration camp narrative dressed up in pirate clothing, and Oda does not flinch from showing us exactly how bad it was. And right in the middle of that nightmare, we find a child version of Bartholomew Kuma, already massive for his age, already carrying burdens no kid should ever have to carry, and already believing in a god that the rest of the world had forgotten. Let me establish what God Valley actually was before we go further, because I think a lot of people skimmed through these chapters without fully absorbing the implications. God Valley was a hunting ground, not metaphorically, literally. The celestial dragons would gather on this island for a competition where they released slaves into the wilderness and then hunted them for sport. Men, women, children, it did not matter. If you were born into the wrong bloodline, if you were a member of a race the world nobles found distasteful, you were prey. They called it a game. They kept score. They celebrated their kills like trophies. This is what Kuma was born into. This is the world that shaped him. The Buccaneer race, Kuma's people, were specifically targeted for this treatment. And here is where we need to talk about what the Buccaneers actually are, because Oda has been remarkably cagey about the details, and I have some thoughts. The Buccaneers are described as a race that committed some kind of crime in the ancient past, a sin so severe that the world government declared them enemies of humanity forever. Sound familiar? It should. This is the exact same framework used to justify the persecution of the giants, the fishmen, the Lunarians, and basically every non-human race in One Piece. The world government has a type, and that type is anyone who might remember the truth about the Void Century. But the Buccaneers are special. They are not just persecuted for being different. They are persecuted for what they know. Specifically, They are the keepers of the Nika legend. Chapter 1096 makes this explicit. When young Kuma is in the slave camp at God Valley, he tells the other children about the sun god Nika. He describes Nika as a warrior who brings freedom and joy, who makes people laugh even in the darkest circumstances, whose very presence transforms suffering into liberation. And here is the key detail that I need you to file away in your mind brain for later. Kuma does not present this as a fairy tale. He presents it as history, as truth, as something his people have known for generations. The Buccaneers were not just believers in Nika. They were the original witnesses. Somewhere in the ancient past, before the Void Century, before the world government, the Buccaneer race encountered the sun god, and they never forgot. They passed the story down through generations of slavery and persecution, keeping the flame alive when everyone else had given up. And the world government knew this. They knew that as long as the Buccaneers existed, the memory of Nika would survive. So they tried to wipe them out. Not just enslave them, exterminate them. Kuma is one of the last of his kind because the world government has been conducting a quiet genocide for 800 years. This recontextualizes everything about Kuma's faith. When he carries that Bible, when he quotes scripture, when he talks about hope and freedom, he is not being generically religious. He is practicing the forbidden faith of his ancestors. He is keeping alive a truth that empires have killed to suppress. And when he looks at Luffy and sees the potential for Nika's return, he is not just rooting for a cool pirate. He is witnessing the fulfillment of a prophecy his people died for. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Back to God Valley. Back to the child in the slave camp. Young Kuma is enormous even as a kid, which makes him valuable as a labourer, but also makes him a target. The bigger slaves get hunted first because they are considered more dangerous, more impressive trophies. So Kuma learns early to make himself useful in ways that do not attract attention. He becomes a caretaker. He looks after the younger children, the weaker prisoners, the ones who would not survive without help. And he tells them stories. Every night, in the darkness of the slave quarters, this giant child whispers about the sun god who will come to save them. He makes them laugh. He gives them hope. And in doing so, he becomes a tiny version of the god he believes in. This is where Kuma meets the two people who will define the rest of his life. The first is Emporio Ivankov, future commander of the Revolutionary Army, current prisoner of God Valley. Ivankov is already flamboyant, already defiant, already refusing to let the celestial dragons break his spirit. He and Kuma bond over their shared refusal to despair. They become brothers in everything but blood, united by the belief that one day things will change. The second person Kuma meets is a girl named Ginny, and I need you to prepare yourself emotionally for Ginny because her story is going to hurt. Ginny is small, fierce, and absolutely unbreakable. She survives God Valley through sheer force of will, through cleverness, through a refusal to accept that her life will end in a hunting ground. She and Kuma become inseparable. Not romantically, not yet. They are children. But the foundation is laid here, in the worst place imaginable, between two people who should have been destroyed by their circumstances and instead found reasons to keep fighting. Ginny believes in Kuma's stories about Nika. She believes in him. And Kuma, for the first time in his life, has something other than faith to hold on to. He has a person. The God Valley incident itself, the famous battle between Rox D. Zebek and the alliance of Garp and Roger, is almost secondary to Kuma's story. It happens around him rather than to him. While legends clash and the fate of the world hangs in the balance, Kuma is focused on one thing: getting the other slaves to safety. Does not care about Rox. He does not care about Roger. He cares about Ginny and Ivankov and the children he has been protecting. And somehow, in the chaos of that battle, they escape. Not because anyone saved them, because they saved themselves. They use the distraction of the god-tier punch fight happening around them to slip away, to steal a boat, to flee into the unknown. This is the origin of everything that comes later. The Revolutionary Army, the freedom fighters, all of it traces back to a group of escaped slaves who refused to accept that the world had to be this way. Kuma did not become a revolutionary because of ideology. He became a revolutionary because he survived God Valley and decided that no one else should ever have to. The Nika legend was not abstract theology to him. It was a survival mechanism that he transformed into a political mission. If the sun god was real, if freedom was possible, then the system that created God Valley had to be destroyed. And Kuma was willing to spend his entire life making that happen. But the scars of God Valley never fully healed. Kuma emerged from that nightmare with a deep, unshakable trauma that would influence every decision he made for the rest of his life. He knew, in his bones, what the world government was capable of. He knew that they would hunt him forever simply for existing. He knew that any happiness he found could be ripped away at a moment's notice, because that is what power does to the powerless. And this knowledge made him desperate. Desperate to protect the people he loved. Desperate to see Nika's return. Desperate enough eventually to make deals with devils if it meant his daughter might live in a world where children did not get hunted for sport. We are not there yet. First, we need to talk about what happened after God Valley. We need to talk about freedom, about revolution, about a woman named Ginny who grew up to be everything Kuma loved, and about how the world government took her from him in the cruelest way possible. The slave camps were just the beginning. The real tragedy was still coming. Freedom is a strange thing when you have never had it before. You would think that escaping slavery would be the end of the nightmare, right? You get out, you breathe free air. You start living the life that was stolen from you. But that is not how trauma works. That is not how the world works when the people who enslaved you are still in power, still hunting you, still convinced that your very existence is a crime. Kuma, Ivankov, and Ginny escaped God Valley, but they did not escape the world government. They just became fugitives instead of prisoners, and fugitives have to fight. The years immediately following God Valley are covered in chapters 1097 and 1098, and they represent some of the most bittersweet storytelling fictional pirate creator man has ever produced. Because on one hand, this is when Kuma experiences genuine happiness for the first time in his life. He is free. He is surrounded by people who love him. He is doing meaningful work to change the world. But on the other hand, we the audience know how this ends. We know that everything Kuma builds during this period will eventually be taken from him. So every smile, every moment of joy, every panel of Kuma looking content is tinged with the knowledge of future devastation. Oda is a sadist. I say this with love, and also with genuine frustration at how effectively he manipulates my emotions. The freedom fighters, the precursor organization to the Revolutionary Army, were founded by Kuma and Ginny. This is a detail that I think gets overlooked in a lot of discussions about Dragon. Dragon is the face of the revolution. Dragon is the world's most wanted criminal. Dragon gets all the credit. But the actual groundwork, the ideology, the infrastructure, that came from escaped slaves who decided they were done running. Kuma and Ginny started recruiting other survivors, other people who had been crushed by the world government, and they built a network. Not an army yet, just a network of people who believed things could be different. And then Dragon showed up. Now, we do not know exactly when or how Dragon joined the freedom fighters, and Oda has been characteristically vague about this. But here is what we can infer from the flashbacks. Dragon was not an escaped slave. He was not a member of a persecuted race. He was the son of Monkey D. Garp, a marine hero, a man of privilege by One Piece standards. So why did he join a revolutionary movement led by former slaves? The obvious answer is ideology. Dragon saw the injustice of the world and decided to fight against it. But I think there is something deeper going on, and this is where I am going to engage in some educated cockery. Dragon joined the freedom fighters because of Kuma, specifically because of what Kuma represented. Here was a man who had every reason to be broken, every reason to give up, every reason to hate the world. And instead, he chose hope. He chose faith. He chose to believe in a sun god who would bring freedom to everyone, not just the people who looked like him. That kind of conviction is contagious. I think Dragon, who clearly had his own issues with the world government given his family situation, saw in Kuma a purity of purpose that he wanted to be part of. Kuma was not fighting for revenge, he was fighting for liberation. And that distinction matters. The freedom fighters grew. They became the revolutionary army. Dragon eventually took over leadership, probably because his strategic mind and his family connections made him a more effective figurehead. But Kuma remained central to everything. He was the heart of the revolution, even if Dragon was the brain. And through all of it, Ginny was there. Ginny, who had grown from a fierce little girl into a fierce young woman. Ginny, who had been by Kuma's side since the slave camps. Ginny, who Kuma loved with every fibre of his being, even if he never quite managed to tell her. Chapter 1098 gives us the relationship between Kuma and Ginny in devastating detail. They are partners, they are co-leaders, they are best friends, and they are very clearly in love with each other, in that awkward, unspoken way where everyone around them can see it except them. Ivankov makes jokes about it. The other revolutionaries make jokes about it. But Kuma, for all his courage in battle, cannot bring himself to confess. He is too scared, too convinced that happiness is not something he deserves, too aware that the world government could take everything from him at any moment, so why risk his heart when it will just get broken? And then the world government takes Ginny anyway. I need to talk about this carefully because it is one of the darkest things Oda has ever written, and I do not want to sensationalize it. Ginny is kidnapped by a celestial dragon. Not killed. Kidnapped. Taken as a slave, as a wife, as property. A world noble saw her during a revolutionary army operation and decided he wanted her, so he took her. That is the level of power these people operate at. They see a human being and they simply claim ownership. And there is nothing anyone can do about it. The revolutionary army is not strong enough yet to challenge Mary Joyce directly. Kuma is not strong enough to rescue her. Ginny is just gone. Imagine being Kuma in that moment. You escaped slavery once. You built a new life. You fell in love with someone who understood everything you had been through because she had been through it too. And then the same system that tortured you as a child reaches out and snatches away the person you love most. Not because of anything she did. Not because of any failure on your part. Just because a rich monster wanted a new toy. This is the moment that breaks Kuma. Not God Valley. Not the eventual Pacifista modifications. This. The realization that no matter how far you run, no matter how hard you fight, the world government can still take everything from you whenever they feel like it. Ginny does not survive her captivity. Or rather, she survives it, but not intact. The celestial dragon who took her eventually discards her when she becomes inconvenient, which is Oda's way of telling us something horrific happened without spelling it out explicitly. Ginny is returned to the world, but she is dying. She has contracted a disease, and she has a child, a daughter, a little girl with pink hair and a terminal illness who will never know her father because her father was a monster who threw her mother away like garbage. Ginny makes it back to Kuma. Barely. She lives long enough to put her daughter in his arms, to tell him the child's name, to say goodbye to the man she loved but never got to be with. And then she dies. Kuma is left holding a baby he did not father, a child born from the worst trauma imaginable, and he makes a choice. He does not blame the child for her origins. He does not resent her for being a reminder of everything he lost. He claims her as his own. He names her Bonney after Ginny. He becomes her father in every way that matters. This is who Bartholomew Kuma is. Not a tyrant, not a monster. A man who took in the daughter of the woman he loved and the monster who destroyed her. And he loved that child unconditionally. He raised her alone. He read her stories about Nika, the same stories he told in the slave camps. He built a life around protecting her, around making sure she never experienced the horrors that he and Ginny had survived. And when that life was threatened, when Bonney got sick with the same disease that killed her mother, Kuma did what any parent would do. He started looking for miracles. The sapphire scale diagnosis is where Kuma's story shifts from tragedy to nightmare. Because up until this point, he could still fight. He could still hope. He could still believe that the future might be better than the past. But when your child is dying and there is no cure, when every doctor tells you she has maybe a few years left, hope starts to feel like cruelty, and desperation makes people do terrible things. Kuma was about to do the most terrible thing imaginable. He was about to sell his soul to the world government, the same organization that enslaved him, that hunted his people, that murdered the woman he loved. And he was going to do it with a smile, because it meant Bonney might live. Sapphire scale. Even the name sounds beautiful, does it not? Like something you would find in a treasure chest, not a medical diagnosis. Fictional pirate creator man has a talent for naming horrible things in ways that disguise their horror. Buster Call sounds like a wrestling move until you realize it means erase an island from existence. Celestial Dragons sounds majestic until you understand they are slavers wearing bubble helmets. And Sapphire Scale sounds almost romantic until you learn that it is a death sentence for children, a disease that turns the body into a prison of calcified skin, slowly suffocating the victim over years while their loved ones watch helplessly. Chapter 1099 introduces Sapphire Scale in the context of Bonney's diagnosis, and the details are appropriately nightmarish. The disease causes the skin to harden and crystallize, starting at the extremities and working inward. Patients cannot go outside in natural light because sunlight accelerates the calcification. They become trapped indoors, trapped in darkness, trapped in a body that is slowly turning to stone. And there is no cure. Not in the conventional medical sense. Doctors can slow the progression, can manage the symptoms, can make the patient comfortable, but they cannot stop it. Sapphire Scale is a terminal illness with a timeline measured in years if you are lucky, months if you are not. Bonney was diagnosed young, very young. Young enough that she should have been running around outside, playing in the sun, experiencing the world with the boundless energy of childhood. Instead, she was confined to a church in the Sorbet Kingdom, wrapped in bandages to protect her skin, watching the sunlight through stained glass windows because direct exposure would kill her faster. And Kuma, this enormous man who had survived slavery and revolution and the loss of the woman he loved, was reduced to reading bedtime stories to a dying child and pretending everything would be okay. The church years are some of the most emotionally devastating panels in the entire Egghead flashback sequence. Oda draws Kuma as genuinely happy during this period, happier than we have ever seen him, and that happiness makes the tragedy worse. He has found peace. He has found purpose. He wakes up every day and takes care of his daughter, tells her stories about Nika, watches her smile despite the pain she must be feeling. Bonney calls him Papa. She loves him unconditionally, the way children do before the world teaches them to be cynical. And Kuma loves her back with an intensity that borders on desperation because he knows the clock is ticking. He knows that every day with her might be the last. He knows that unless something changes, he is going to bury his daughter just like he buried Ginny. So he starts looking for alternatives. He contacts every doctor, every scientist, every rumoured miracle worker in the world. He uses his revolutionary army connections to search for experimental treatments. He travels to islands known for advanced medicine, drags Bonney to specialists who poke and prod and ultimately shrug their shoulders. Nothing works. Nobody has seen sapphire scale before, at least not frequently enough to develop a treatment. Bonney is a medical mystery, and medical mysteries tend to end badly. And then someone mentions Vegapunk. Now, at this point in the timeline, Vegapunk is already the world government's chief scientist. He's already building weapons for the Marines, already conducting research that most people would consider ethically questionable at best. But he is also, undeniably, the smartest man in the world. If anyone can cure an incurable disease, it is Vegapunk. The problem is obvious. Vegapunk works for the world government, the same world government that enslaved Kuma as a child, that hunted the Buccaneers to near extinction, that kidnapped and destroyed Ginny. Going to Vegapunk means going to the enemy. It means walking into the lion's den and hoping the lion feels generous. Kuma goes anyway, because that is what parents do. They walk into lions' dens. They make deals with devils. They sacrifice everything if it means their child might live. The Revolutionary Army advises against it. Dragon himself probably warned Kuma that this was a trap, that the world government would never help a Buccaneer without extracting something terrible in return. But Kuma does not care about his own safety anymore. He stopped caring about that the moment Bonney was diagnosed. His life has exactly one purpose now: keep his daughter alive. Everything else is negotiable. The journey to Egghead Island is covered briefly in chapter 1100, and Oda frames it like a pilgrimage. Kuma carries Bonney across the sea, protecting her from sunlight, keeping her wrapped and hidden and safe. He is a giant man cradling a tiny bundle, crossing oceans to find a miracle. And when he finally arrives at Egghead, when he finally stands before Vegapunk, he does not make demands. He does not threaten. He begs. Bartholomew Kuma, former slave, Revolutionary Army commander, one of the most powerful pirates in the world, gets on his knees and begs a stranger to save his daughter. Vegapunk's reaction to this is crucial to understanding everything that happens next. Because Vegapunk is not a villain. He is a scientist, which is arguably worse in some ways because scientists are capable of moral flexibility that villains cannot manage. Vegapunk looks at Kuma and sees opportunity. He sees a Buccaneer, a member of a near-extinct race with unique physiological properties. He sees a man with a powerful devil fruit, a body that could serve as the template for an army. He sees leverage, but he also sees a father. And somewhere in that genius brain of his, Vegapunk feels something like sympathy. The initial deal is almost reasonable. Vegapunk agrees to research sapphire scale to develop a potential cure using his advanced technology. In exchange, Kuma agrees to let Vegapunk study him. Not modify him. Not yet. Just study. Take samples, run tests, analyze the Buccaneer physiology and the Nikyu no Mi. It seems fair. It seems like both parties are getting what they want. But this is where Saturn enters the picture, and everything goes to hell. St. J. Garcia Saturn, one of the 5 elders, takes an interest in Kuma's case. And Saturn's interest is never a good thing. Saturn does not care about curing Bonney. Saturn does not care about scientific advancement. Saturn cares about one thing: control. He sees Kuma, a Buccaneer who knows the Nika legend, who has connections to the Revolutionary Army, who possesses a devil fruit with terrifying applications, and he sees a threat that needs to be neutralized. But killing Kuma outright would be wasteful. Better to use him. Better to turn the threat into a weapon. Saturn modifies the deal. The cure for Bonney will happen, but it will not be free. Kuma must agree to become a Pacifista, not a template for the Pacifista program, though that will happen too. Kuma himself must be converted. His body will be modified with cybernetics. His free will, eventually, will be removed. He will become PX0, the prototype. the proof of concept for an army of human weapons. And in exchange, his daughter gets to live. This is the choice that fictional pirate creator man puts before Kuma, and it is not really a choice at all. What parent, given the option between their own existence and their child's survival, would choose themselves? Kuma does not hesitate. He does not negotiate. He does not try to find a loophole. He agrees. He signs away his body, his mind, his future, everything, because Bonney will live. She will see the sun again. She will grow up. She will have the life that was stolen from Ginny, stolen from the Buccaneers, stolen from everyone who died at God Valley. And here is the detail that destroys me every time I think about it. Kuma asks for time. Not much. Just enough to watch Bonney get better. Just enough to see her cured before he loses himself. And Saturn, in a moment of calculated cruelty disguised as generosity, agrees. Kuma can have a few years. He can keep pieces of himself for a while longer, losing his humanity in stages rather than all at once. The modifications will be gradual. The erasure of his personality will be the final step after everything else is done. It sounds like mercy. It is actually prolonged torture. Saturn wants Kuma to feel every step of his own destruction. He wants the Buccaneer to know exactly what is being taken from him, piece by piece, until there is nothing left. The deal is struck. Bonney's treatment begins. And Kuma starts dying. Not physically, spiritually. Every modification chips away at who he is. Every procedure brings him closer to the empty shell we meet at Marineford. But he keeps smiling. He keeps telling Bonney stories about Nika. He keeps being her father for as long as he possibly can, even as the clock counts down to the moment when he will not remember her name. This is the foundation of everything that comes in Saga 3. The Devil's contract has been signed. Now we need to examine what Saturn really wanted, what Vegapunk actually did, and why the Pacifista program is more complicated than anyone realizes. Because Kuma did not just sell his body. He planted seeds. He made preparations. He turned his own destruction into a weapon against the people who destroyed him. And that is the kind of long-term planning that deserves its own saga. Now we enter the territory of cockery, folks. Fair warning. Saga 3 is where we move from established canon into the realm of connecting dots that fictional pirate creator man has scattered across 1,000 chapters. And some of those connections are going to be speculative. I will tell you when I am theorizing versus when I am citing direct evidence. But I need you to understand that this saga is about reading between the lines, about asking questions that the manga has not explicitly answered yet, and about treating the Vegapunk Kuma Saturn triangle as the deeply suspicious arrangement that it obviously is. Let us start with a question that has been bothering me since the Egghead flashbacks dropped. How did Vegapunk cure Sapphire Scale? The manga tells us that he did it, that Bonney was healed, that she can now walk in sunlight without her skin turning to crystal. But the mechanism is left frustratingly vague. Vegapunk is shown working on Bonney, doing science things with science equipment, and then she is better. That is not an explanation. That is a montage. And Oda does not do montages without reason. When he skips over details, it is usually because those details will become relevant later, and he does not want to commit to specifics that might contradict future plot developments. So let me offer a theory based on what we know about Vegapunk's other projects. The Seraphim. Those artificial humans that showed up during the Egghead arc and proceeded to wreck everyone's day. The Seraphim are clones of former Shichibukai, enhanced with Lunarian DNA and given copies of powerful devil fruits. They are, in terms of raw capability, some of the most dangerous weapons the world government has ever produced. And here is the interesting thing about the Seraphim project. The timeline matches up suspiciously well with Kuma's deal. Vegapunk started developing the Seraphim technology around the same time he was treating Bonney. Not before, during. This could be coincidence. This could be Vegapunk multitasking because he is a genius and geniuses do that. Or it could be something more uncomfortable. What if the cure for Sapphire Scale was not just charity? What if Vegapunk extracted something from Bonney, something related to her unique physiology, and used it to advance his other projects? Think about what makes the Seraphim special. They are not just clones. They are clones that can grow and develop, that have functioning biological systems that can integrate foreign DNA without rejection. That requires an incredible understanding of genetic compatibility, of immune system manipulation, of how to make a body accept modifications that should be impossible. Now think about Sapphire Scale, a disease that causes the body to attack itself, to calcify its own tissues, to treat skin as a foreign invader that must be neutralized. Curing that disease would require Vegapunk to become an expert in exactly the same biological systems that make the Seraphim possible. I am not saying Vegapunk experimented on Bonney maliciously. I do not think that is in character for him based on everything we have seen. But I am saying that he is a scientist, and scientists do not waste data. If curing Bonney gave him insights into genetic manipulation, into immune system hacking, into making bodies accept impossible changes, he would absolutely use that knowledge. The Seraphim might be, in a very real sense, built on a foundation of research that started with a dying girl and her desperate father. Kuma paid for his daughter's life with his body, but Bonney might have paid too, in ways she never knew about, with her biology becoming a blueprint for weapons of mass destruction. And then there is the matter of what Vegapunk actually thinks about all of this. Because Vegapunk is not a simple character, and reducing him to either good scientist helping people or evil scientist enabling tyranny misses the point entirely. Vegapunk is a man trapped between his ideals and his circumstances. He wants to help humanity. He wants to advance knowledge. He wants to make the world better. But he is employed by the world government, which means every discovery he makes, every miracle he creates, gets weaponized. The same genius that cured Bonney also built the Pacifistas. The same technology that saved a child's life is now used to enforce the will of the celestial dragons. Chapter 1101 has a conversation between Vegapunk and Kuma that I think about constantly. Vegapunk apologizes, not for what he has done yet, but for what he is about to do. He tells Kuma that he wishes things could be different, that in a better world, he could help without demanding such a terrible price. And Kuma forgives him. Immediately. Completely. Because Kuma understands something that Vegapunk himself might not fully grasp. The system is the enemy, not the people trapped within it. Vegapunk did not create the world where a father must sell his soul to save his daughter. The world government did. The celestial dragons did. Vegapunk is just the mechanism through which that transaction is processed. But forgiveness does not mean trust. And this is where Kuma's genius reveals itself, because Kuma is not just a victim in this arrangement. He is a player. He knows that Vegapunk feels guilty. He knows that Vegapunk wants to be a good person even while doing terrible things. And he uses that guilt. Not manipulatively, not cruelly, but strategically. Kuma asks Vegapunk for favors. Small ones at first. Access to information. Updates on the Revolutionary Army's activities. Knowledge about world government operations that a normal Pacifista subject would never receive. And Vegapunk provides because every favor is a way to assuage his conscience, a way to tell himself that he is not completely complicit in the destruction of a good man. The Nikyu know me becomes central to this quiet negotiation. Kuma's devil fruit has properties that even Vegapunk finds fascinating, and Vegapunk has been studying devil fruits longer than almost anyone alive. The ability to push abstract concepts out of people, to extract pain and fatigue and memories and transplant them elsewhere, violates every understood law of how devil fruits are supposed to work. Most fruits manipulate the physical world. Kuma's fruit manipulates reality on a conceptual level. That is not just powerful. That is philosophically terrifying. And Vegapunk, being Vegapunk, wants to understand it. So they make additional arrangements. Kuma allows Vegapunk to study the Nikyu no Mi in depth, to analyze how it works, to document its capabilities. In exchange, Vegapunk helps Kuma do something that should be impossible. He helps Kuma store his own memories. Not just record them, not just write them down, but literally extract them from his mind and preserve them in a form that can be experienced by someone else later. This is the memory bubble that we see Bonney interact with during the Egghead arc. It is not just a recording. It is Kuma's actual memories, pushed out of his brain using his own power, stabilized using Vegapunk's technology, hidden away for his daughter to find when she's ready. Think about what this means. Kuma knew he was going to lose himself. He knew that the final modification would erase everything that made him who he was. So he cheated. He used the very power that made him valuable to the world government to smuggle out a piece of his soul before they could take it. Saturn thought he was getting a perfectly obedient weapon. What he actually got was an empty shell with a self-destruct timer, because the real Kuma, the memories and personality and love that defined him, were already gone, hidden, waiting. The world government bought a corpse and did not realize it until years later, when that corpse started running across the red line to protect its daughter, Vegapunk's. Complicity in this deception is never explicitly stated, but I refuse to believe he did not know. The man is too smart. He was literally studying the Nikyu no Mi while Kuma was using it to extract his memories. There is no way Vegapunk missed what was happening, which means Vegapunk helped. Quietly, deniably, but helped nonetheless. He provided the technology to stabilize the memory bubble. He probably advised Kuma on where to hide it. He might have even suggested the idea in the first place, as a way to preserve something of the man he was being forced to destroy. This is the Vegapunk bargain in its true form. On the surface, it looks like a straightforward transaction. Kuma gives his body, the world government gives Bonney's cure. But underneath, there are layers of deception and counter-deception. Vegapunk is extracting research data and assuaging his guilt. Kuma is extracting information and preserving his legacy. Saturn thinks he is in control, but both of his pawns are playing their own games. The deal that created PX0 was actually 3 deals happening simultaneously, and only one of them was ever written down. We need to go deeper into what Saturn wanted, because Saturn's motivations are the key to understanding why the world government was willing to make this bargain at all. A Pacifista army is valuable, sure, but Saturn did not need Kuma specifically for that. He could have used any powerful pirate, any devil fruit user, any test subject. The fact that he chose Kuma, that he insisted on Kuma personally becoming PX0, suggests that the Pacifista program was not the primary goal. It was cover. The real goal was something else entirely, something connected to the Buccaneer bloodline and the prophecy that Kuma had been preaching since childhood. The Pacifista program is presented to us, both in-universe and as readers, as a straightforward military project. Clone a powerful pirate, remove his free will, mass-produce the body, deploy the copies as weapons. Simple, efficient. The world government gets an army of Kuma-shaped laser cannons, and all it costs is one man's humanity. Everybody wins except the man being turned into a manufacturing template. This is the official story, the one that Marines believe, the one that most of the fandom accepted until the Egghead arc started pulling back curtains we did not even know existed. But the official story has holes, big ones, holes that have been bothering me since Sabaody, and which only got bigger the more fictional pirate creator man revealed about Kuma's backstory. Because if the Pacifista program was really just about creating obedient weapons, why does PX0 keep doing things that obedient weapons should not do? Let us compile a list of PX0's suspicious behaviors, and I want you to notice the pattern here. At Thriller Bark, PX0 has a conversation with Moria instead of simply executing his mission. He asks questions. He evaluates. He makes independent decisions about whether to engage or withdraw. At Sabaody, PX0 does not capture the Straw Hats, even though capturing pirates is ostensibly his job. He sends them to specific locations using his devil fruit, a power that should not even be accessible if his personality has been fully suppressed. After Sabaody, PX0 stations himself at the Thousand Sunny and defends it for 2 years against all attackers, a mission that was never officially assigned to him. At Marineford, PX0 is present but largely passive, not engaging Luffy despite Luffy being a high priority target. And at Egghead, when Bonney is threatened, a body with no brain and no memories crosses an ocean on foot to protect her. None of this makes sense if PX0 is just a robot following orders. Robots do not ask philosophical questions. Robots do not assign themselves missions. Robots do not run across continents on instinct. Something else is happening here, and the manga has given us enough pieces to start assembling a picture of what that something more might be. Here is my theory, and I am going to lay out the evidence before I make the claim so you can follow my reasoning. The Pacifista modifications were supposed to erase Kuma's personality and replace it with pure obedience. That is what Saturn paid for. That is what Vegapunk was officially hired to deliver. But Vegapunk is the smartest man in the world, and smart people find loopholes. I believe that Vegapunk deliberately designed the Pacifista conversion process to be incomplete. Not obviously incomplete, not in a way that Saturn would notice, but subtly incomplete in ways that would preserve fragments of Kuma's core self even after everything else was stripped away. Think about how the human mind actually works. Personality is not a single thing that can be cleanly removed like an organ. It is a complex web of memories, habits, emotional patterns, and instinctive responses built up over a lifetime. When Vegapunk erased Kuma's personality, he would have had to make decisions about what counted as personality versus what counted as basic functionality. Does the ability to walk count as personality? Obviously not. Does the tendency to protect children count as personality? That is less clear. Does the bone-deep instinct to guard the people you love count as personality? Or is it something more fundamental, something wired into the body itself through decades of repetition? I think Vegapunk classified Kuma's protective instincts as not personality. I think he deliberately left those neural pathways intact, disguising them as basic motor functions or combat protocols. Saturn would never notice because Saturn does not understand love. Saturn sees emotions as weaknesses to be exploited, not as fundamental drives that can survive the destruction of conscious thought. So when Vegapunk presented PX0 as a fully compliant weapon, Saturn accepted it at face value. He did not think to check whether the machine still felt the urge to protect a specific ship or run toward a specific island when danger threatened. The evidence for this interpretation is scattered throughout the manga, but it is there if you know where to look. Chapter 509, when Kuma finishes sending the Straw Hats away at Sabaody, he says something that has haunted me for years. He says, "I will never see you again," directly to Rayleigh, not "I will not see you again," as in a prediction. "I will never see you again," as in a conscious acknowledgement that he is about to stop existing as a person. And then he asks Rayleigh to protect the Sunny until the Straw Hats return. This is a request, not an order. It is Kuma in his final moments of coherent selfhood, establishing a mission that he knows his body will try to complete even after his mind is gone. Rayleigh does not end up protecting the Sunny full time. He checks on it, helps Frankie at certain points, but he is not there constantly. You know who is there constantly? PX0. The supposedly mindless weapon spends 2 years doing exactly what Kuma asked Rayleigh to do. It is almost like Kuma was not really asking Rayleigh at all. He was programming himself. He was using the conversation as a way to cement the mission in whatever fragments of his psyche would survive the final modification. Protect the Sunny was not just a request. It was an anchor, a purpose strong enough to persist through personality death. This reframes the entire Pacifista program as something much more tragic and much more hopeful than it initially appears. Tragic because Kuma knew he was dying and spent his final moments trying to preserve just enough of himself to keep helping the people he cared about. Hopeful because it worked. The world government thought they were getting an obedient weapon, and instead they got a sleeper agent. PX0 follows orders most of the time because that is how Vegapunk designed him to behave. But when those orders conflict with Kuma's core drives, the drives win. Protect the Sunny, protect Bonney, protect the future sun god. These are not commands in PX0's programming. They are deeper than programming. They are what remains of a father's love after everything else has been burned away. And the mass-produced Pacifista units, the PX1 through PX whatever copies that show up at Sabaody and Marineford, they do not have this. They are pure weapons because they are copies of Kuma's body, not copies of his soul. They have his physical capabilities, his laser mouth, his general appearance, but they lack the subtle neurological quirks that Vegapunk preserved in the original. This is why PX0 is special. This is why Bonney's command authority only works on him and not on the mass-produced units. The other Pacifistas are machines. PX0 is a haunted machine, possessed by the ghost of a man who refused to fully die. The Vivre card databook entries support this interpretation in ways that I find deeply suspicious. Kuma's entry notes that his will was supposedly erased during the Pacifista process, but it uses language that is oddly hedged, not destroyed or eliminated, but something closer to suppressed or overwritten. And in One Piece, words matter. Fictional pirate creator man chooses his vocabulary carefully, especially in supplementary materials that he knows obsessive fans will scrutinize. If Kuma's will was truly gone, the databook would say gone. The fact that it does not suggest that something remains, something Vegapunk made sure would remain, something the world government does not know about. There is also the question of the self-destruct command. During the Egghead arc, we learn that Kuma was given the authority to self-destruct, to end his own existence if he ever became a liability. This is presented as a fail-safe, a way for the world government to dispose of their weapon if it malfunctions. But think about who actually holds that authority. Kuma does. Or rather, whatever remains of Kuma does. The world government gave a supposedly mindless machine the ability to kill itself, which only makes sense if they believe the machine had no reason to use that ability. But if fragments of Kuma's consciousness are still in there, if he is aware on some level of what has been done to him, then the self-destruct is not a fail-safe. It is an escape hatch. It is Vegapunk giving Kuma one final choice, one last piece of agency, hidden in plain sight as a security feature. Has Kuma used it? Not yet. Not as of the current manga chapters. But the option exists, and the fact that it exists tells us something about Vegapunk's intentions. He did not build PX0 to be a perfect slave. He built PX0 to be a prisoner with a hidden key, waiting for the right moment to unlock the cell door. Whether that moment comes, whether Kuma ever regains enough awareness to make that choice, remains to be seen. But the architecture is there. The possibility is preserved, and that is more than Saturn ever intended to give him. We have examined what Vegapunk did. We have examined what Kuma embedded in his own destruction. Now we need to examine the third player in this arrangement, the one who thinks he is in control, the one who made demands without understanding what he was really buying. St. J. Garcia Saturn wanted Bartholomew Kuma for reasons that go beyond military utility. And those reasons connect to everything we have discussed about the Buccaneer race and the Nika prophecy. Saturn was not just building a weapon, He was trying to neutralize a threat that has been haunting the world government for 800 years. St. J. Garcia Saturn is not stupid. I need to establish this clearly before we go any further, because understanding Saturn requires understanding that every decision he makes is calculated, every cruelty is purposeful, and every apparent misstep is actually part of a larger strategy that operates on timescales most humans cannot comprehend. The five elders have been running the world for centuries. They have seen empires rise and fall. They have crushed rebellions before Dragon was born, before Roger was born, before the concept of the Great Pirate Era was even imaginable. Saturn does not make impulsive decisions. Saturn does not act without reason. So when Saturn took a personal interest in Bartholomew Kuma, when he modified Vegapunk's deal to ensure that this specific Buccaneer would become the Pacifista prototype, he was not just acquiring a weapon. He was executing a containment protocol that has been in development for 800 years. The world government is afraid of Nika. This is not speculation. This is canon. The Gorosei have explicitly stated that the Gomu Gomu no Mi, which is actually the Hito Hito no Mi model Nika, is so dangerous that they renamed it, hid its true nature, and have been trying to acquire it for centuries without success. They erased Nika from history books. They banned mention of the sun god in official records. They hunted down anyone who knew the old stories, which is exactly why the Buccaneer race was targeted for extermination. The Buccaneers were not killed because of some ancient crime. They were killed because they remembered. They kept the Nika legend alive when everyone else had forgotten, and that made them an existential threat to a regime built on the suppression of inconvenient truths. Kuma was one of the last Buccaneers. He was also one of the most visible, given his size and his distinctive appearance. The world government knew about him. They tracked him through God Valley, through his revolutionary activities, through his rise to infamy, and they knew what he believed. Kuma never hid his faith. He carried a Bible openly. He spoke about hope and liberation to anyone who would listen. He raised his daughter on stories of the sun god who would come to free the world. From the world government's perspective, Kuma was not just a pirate or a revolutionary. He was a priest of a forbidden religion, keeping alive a prophecy that could destroy everything they had built. So why not just kill him? This is the question that should be nagging at your mind brain right now. If Kuma was such a threat, if his very existence was a danger to the world government's control, why did Saturn go through the elaborate process of converting him into a pacifista instead of simply executing him? The bounty system exists. The Marines have the capacity to hunt down and eliminate threats. Saturn could have sent an admiral to solve the Kuma problem permanently, and that would have been the end of it. Except it would not have been the end of it, because killing Kuma would have made him a martyr. The Revolutionary Army would have used his death as a rallying cry. Other Buccaneers, if any remained in hiding, might have been inspired to emerge and continue his work. The legend of Nika would have survived because legends are harder to kill than people. Saturn understood this. He understood that you cannot destroy a belief by killing its believers. You have to discredit the belief itself. You have to take the symbol and corrupt it, twist it, turn it into proof that resistance is futile. That is what the Pacifista program was really about. Not military utility. Propaganda. Saturn took the last prominent Buccaneer, the keeper of the Nika flame, the man who told stories about freedom and joy, and he turned that man into a mindless weapon of oppression. Look at what your sun god priest became, the message says. Look at how he serves us now. Your hope is empty. Your faith is meaningless. The man who promised liberation is now the enforcer of your chains. This is what happens to everyone who believes they can challenge the natural order. The cruelty of making Kuma a slave to the celestial dragons, of having world nobles ride him like an animal at the reverie, was not incidental. It was the point. Saturn wanted the world to see. He wanted anyone who still whispered about Nika, anyone who still dreamed of revolution to understand that even the greatest believers could be broken. Kuma was not just converted into a weapon, he was converted into a warning, a living monument to the futility of resistance. But here is where Saturn's 800-year-old arrogance betrayed him. He assumed that destroying Kuma's personality would be sufficient. He assumed that a mindless body could not threaten him. He assumed wrong, because Saturn does not understand love. He understands fear and power and control, the currencies he's been trading in since the Void Century. But love is not a currency. Love is a force, and forces do not care about the intentions of the people who try to harness them. Saturn thought he was neutralizing a threat. What he actually did was create a bomb with a very long fuse. The Nika insurance policy. This is what I am calling Kuma's long-term strategy, and I fully acknowledge that this is deep cockery territory, but hear me out because the pieces fit. Kuma knew he was going to be destroyed. He knew that his body would be used against everything he believed in. He knew that Saturn's goal was to weaponize his faith against itself, and he accepted this, because acceptance was the only way to save Bonney. But acceptance does not mean surrender. Kuma could not prevent his conversion. He could not stop Saturn's propaganda campaign. What he could do was plant seeds. The memory bubble containing his entire life, hidden for Bonney to find. The protective instincts embedded in PX0's architecture, waiting to activate when the right triggers appeared. The information he shared with Vegapunk, with Dragon, with Ivankov, ensuring that multiple people knew the full truth of what had happened and why. The 2 years guarding the Sunny, establishing that the future Sun God's crew would have the resources they needed for the new world. Every malfunction of the Pacifista program, every moment where PX0 acted against his programming, was a seed, a tiny rebellion, a message that said the world government's victory was incomplete. And then Luffy awakened the Nika fruit, and every seed Kuma had planted began to bloom simultaneously. Saturn wanted to contain the Nika prophecy by controlling its most devoted believer. Instead, he gave that believer a front row seat to the prophecy's fulfillment. Kuma's body arrived at Egghead just in time to see Bonney witness Luffy's Gear 5th transformation. The empty shell, the mindless weapon, the broken priest was present for the exact moment that proved everything he had ever believed was true. The Sun God returned. Joy Boy lives again, and the man who sacrificed everything to keep that hope alive got to be there when it happened, even if he could not consciously understand what he was seeing. This is why Saturn failed. Not because his plan was bad, not because he was outmaneuvered by Vegapunk or Kuma or Dragon. He failed because he tried to use faith as a weapon without understanding that faith is not controllable. You cannot turn a true believer into a tool of oppression and expect the belief to die. Belief lives in the body as much as the mind. It survives personality death. It runs across oceans. It protects ships for 2 years without rest. Saturn bought a corpse and got a prophet. And now that prophet's daughter is standing next to the sun god himself, carrying the memories of everything the world government tried to erase. Saga 3 is complete. We have examined the deals, the deceptions, and the long-term strategies of all 3 players in the Vegapunk Kuma Saturn triangle. Now we enter the final saga, where all of these threads converge at Egghead Island, and the true scope of Kuma's sacrifice is finally revealed. Bonney sees the memories. The body runs toward hell. And we learn what it means when love refuses to die. Chapter 1104 through 1105. This is where fictional pirate creator man decided that simply making a sad was insufficient, and he needed to reach through the pages and physically rip our hearts out of our chests. I have been reading One Piece for over 2 decades. I have cried at Going Merry's funeral. I have cried at the I Want to Live scene. I have cried at Ace's death and Whitebeard's last stand. and a dozen other moments that this manga has weaponized against my emotional stability. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for Bonney touching that memory bubble and experiencing 40 years of her father's suffering in a single instant. Let me set the scene, because the context matters. Egghead Island is in chaos. The world government has launched a full assault. Saturn himself has descended from Mary Joy's to personally oversee the operation. Vegapunk is being hunted. The Straw Hats are fighting for their lives. And in the middle of all this, Bonney finds the repository that Kuma left for her. A bubble of compressed memories, invisible to everyone except the person it was meant for, containing everything her father experienced, from childhood to the moment of his personality death. She touches it, and she sees. She sees God Valley, the slave camps, the hunts. A little boy watching his people be murdered for sport, telling stories about a sun god to keep the other children from despair. She sees the escape, the years of running, the formation of the freedom fighters. She sees Ginny, her mother, the woman she never knew, laughing and fighting and falling in love with the giant man who would become Bonney's father. She sees the kidnapping, the empty space where Ginny used to be, Kuma's face when he realized he would never see her again. She sees Ginny's return, broken and dying, placing a baby in Kuma's arms. She sees herself as an infant, sees her father's expression when he first held her, sees the moment he decided that this child would be his daughter regardless of biology. She sees the church, the bedtime stories, the bandages and the darkness, and her father's voice telling her about Nika every single night. She sees herself asking questions she has forgotten she ever asked, sees Kuma's patient answers, sees the fear he hid every time he looked at her calcifying skin. She sees the diagnosis, the doctors shaking their heads, her father begging for solutions that did not exist. She sees the journey to Egghead, sees herself wrapped in his arms, sees the ocean passing beneath them as her father carried her toward the only hope they had left. And then she sees the deal. She sees Vegapunk's laboratory and Saturn's cold eyes and the contract that would save her life by ending her father's. She sees Kuma signing away his body, his mind, his future. She sees him smiling, actually smiling, because Bonney would live and nothing else mattered. She sees the modifications beginning, the cybernetics being installed, her father returning from each procedure a little less himself, a little more machine, and never once complaining because every piece he lost was a piece traded for her survival. She sees the final days. Kuma spending every remaining moment with her, telling her stories, making her laugh, memorizing her face so that maybe some fragment of that memory would survive what was coming. She sees him recording this very bubble, pushing his memories out of his own head, crying as he does it because he knows this is goodbye. He knows he will not remember her name in a few hours. He knows the daughter he loves more than anything will become a stranger to the thing that wears his body. And he does it anyway, because at least this way she will understand. At least this way she will know that she was loved. Bonney experiences all of this in what appears to be seconds of real time. 40 years of suffering, condensed into a single, overwhelming flood of emotion and memory. And when she emerges from the bubble, when she returns to the present moment on Egghead Island, she is not the same person. She cannot be. How do you remain unchanged after learning that every moment of your existence was purchased with your father's soul? How do you process the revelation that the monster you have been chasing across the Grand Line, the Pacifista you blamed for abandoning you, was actually the greatest act of love in the history of One Piece? The manga shows Bonney crying. That is an understatement so severe it borders on dishonesty. Bonney is destroyed. She is shattered into pieces and trying to hold herself together while the world explodes around her. And the thing that breaks her most, the detail that pushes her over the edge, is not the suffering. It is the joy. Kuma's memories are not just pain. They contain every happy moment too. Every time he smiled at her. Every time her laughter made him feel like the luckiest man alive. Every quiet evening in the church where he forgot, just for a moment, that they were living on borrowed time. Bonney sees that her father was happy with her. Genuinely, purely happy in a way he had never been before, and would never be again. She was not a burden to him. She was not an obligation. She was the best thing that ever happened to him, and he would have made the same choice 1,000 times over. This is what fictional pirate creator man understands about tragedy that most writers do not. Sadness alone is not devastating. Sadness mixed with joy, love contaminated by loss, happiness that you know cannot last. That is what destroys people. If Kuma's memories were nothing but misery, Bonney could have processed them as horror. She could have felt sorry for her father and moved on. But the memories contain evidence that Kuma was capable of joy, that he experienced genuine happiness, and that he gave it all up willingly. That is so much worse. That is watching someone choose to suffer when they did not have to, and doing it for you. The narrative function of the memory bubble is to transform Bonney from a side character into a thematic pillar of the Egghead arc. Before the bubble, she is a chaotic element, a wild card with unclear motivations who keeps interfering with the Straw Hat's plans. After the bubble, she is the emotional center of everything happening on the island. Her grief becomes the lens through which we understand Saturn's cruelty, Vegapunk's guilt, and the stakes of the ongoing battle. When Bonney screams at Saturn, when she tries to attack him with her bare hands despite knowing she cannot win, we feel the weight of 40 years of injustice behind that scream. She is not just angry for herself. She is angry for Kuma, for Ginny, for God Valley, for every Buccaneer who ever died because the world government decided their existence was inconvenient. And here is where the memory bubble connects to the broader themes of One Piece in a way that I think deserves recognition. Inherited will. The dreams of the dead passed on to the living. This is the core philosophy of the entire manga, stated explicitly by characters like Whitebeard and implicit in every major arc. Roger's will, inherited by Luffy. Odin's will, inherited by Yamato and Momonosuke. Ace's will, inherited by Sabo. The dead do not truly die in One Piece as long as someone remembers them, as long as someone carries their dreams forward. Kuma understood this. He could not live to see Bonney grow up. He could not be there to protect her as she navigated a world that wanted her dead. But he could give her his memories, his experiences, his love in concentrated form. He could make sure that even after his personality died, some version of himself would continue existing in his daughter's heart. The memory bubble is Kuma's will, literally extracted from his mind and preserved for inheritance. And Bonney has accepted it. She knows the truth now. She knows what her father sacrificed, what he believed, what he hoped for. She knows about Nika and the Buccaneers and the 800-year conspiracy to suppress freedom. She is no longer just a pirate with a weird devil fruit. She is the heir to Bartholomew, Kuma's legacy, the keeper of his memories, the continuation of a faith that the world government thought it had finally destroyed. Saturn made a mistake. He thought that erasing Kuma would erase the threat. He did not account for the possibility that Kuma had already passed the torch, that the flame he carried had been transferred to someone new before the wind could extinguish it. Bonney stands on Egghead Island with her father's entire life inside her head, and she is furious, and she is grieving, and she is ready to burn the world down if that is what it takes to make things right. The tyrant is dead. The saint lives on through his daughter. And Saturn is about to learn that you cannot kill an idea by killing the person who believes it. But we are not done yet. Because while Bonney was experiencing 40 years of memories, something else was happening. Something impossible. Somewhere across the ocean, a body with no mind was moving, running, crossing distances that should take weeks in a matter of days. Following an instinct that had no biological explanation, drawn toward an island by a force that scientists would call impossible and parents would call obvious. The empty shell of Bartholomew Kuma was coming home. Chapter 1106 through 1108. The Running Man sequence. I am going to be honest with you, I had to put the manga down when I first read these chapters. Not because they were bad, because they were too good. Because fictional pirate creator man had found the exact frequency that makes my soul vibrate with grief, and he was playing it like a fiddle, and I needed a minute to collect myself before I could continue. This is not hyperbole. This is not content creator exaggeration for engagement. I genuinely had to stop reading One Piece, a thing I have been doing for most of my adult life, because a robot running across an ocean made me feel emotions I was not prepared to process. Let me describe what happens, because the simplicity of it is part of what makes it devastating. Kuma's body, the empty Pacifista shell that has been serving as a slave to the celestial dragons, starts moving. There is no command. There is no programming trigger. There is no logical reason for PX0 to do anything other than stand where it was placed and await orders. But the body moves anyway. It starts walking, then running. It leaves Mary Joy's, descends the red line by a route that should be impossible, and begins crossing the ocean toward Egghead Island. The Marines notice. Of course they notice. A 7-foot-tall cyborg running across the sea is not exactly subtle. They send ships to intercept. They send soldiers to stop him. None of it works. Kuma's body does not fight back, does not engage, does not deviate from its course. It just keeps running. Bullets hit the frame, and the frame keeps running. Cannon fire scorches the metal, and the metal keeps running. The body takes damage that would destroy any of the mass-produced Pacifista units. And it does not slow down, does not stop, does not even seem to notice. It runs like a man possessed, which is exactly what it is. The world government cannot understand what is happening. Their perfect weapon has malfunctioned in a way that defies all their models. PX0 has no personality. PX0 has no memories. PX0 should not be capable of independent action, let alone sustained independent action across thousands of kilometers. Saturn is informed of the situation, and even he, with all his ancient knowledge and cosmic arrogance, cannot explain it. The machine is doing something machines cannot do. The corpse is acting like it is alive. But we understand. We, the audience, armed with the context of Kuma's backstory, understand exactly what is happening. The body is not running toward Egghead Island. The body is running toward Bonney. The same protective instinct that kept PX0 guarding the Sunny for 2 years. The same drive that Vegapunk preserved when he was supposed to erase everything has activated with a force that nothing can stop. Somewhere in the burned-out circuitry of what used to be Bartholomew Kuma, something knows that his daughter is in danger. Something knows that Saturn is there. Something knows that if Bonney dies, then everything Kuma sacrificed will have been for nothing. And that something refuses to let that happen. This is Oda's thesis on parenthood, distilled into a single visual metaphor. Love does not live in the brain. It lives in the body. It lives in the hands that held a child, the arms that carried her across oceans, the legs that walked her to safety 1,000 times before she could walk herself. You can erase a parent's memories. You can destroy their personality. You can reduce them to a machine that follows orders. But you cannot remove the physical fact that they raised a child, that their body learned her weight and her warmth and the sound of her voice. Those experiences are not stored in neurons. They are stored in muscle memory, in cellular patterns, in the fundamental architecture of a form that was shaped by years of love. Kuma's brain is gone, but Kuma's body remembers Bonney, and the body will not stop until it reaches her. There is a panel during the running sequence that I need to talk about because it haunts me. Kuma's face is drawn completely blank. No expression, no recognition, no indication that there is any consciousness behind those mechanical eyes. But there are tears. The body is crying. A machine with no emotions, no memories, no capacity for feeling, is producing tears as it runs toward the daughter it cannot remember having. How do you explain that scientifically? How do you rationalize a robot crying? You cannot. It makes no sense unless you accept that something deeper than personality is at work here. Something that Vegapunk's modifications could not touch. Something that the world government's programming could not overwrite. The body is grieving for reasons it cannot understand, mourning a loss it cannot consciously recall. And it keeps running anyway, because the running is all it has left. Fictional pirate creator man is making an argument here about what survives death. Not spiritual death, not metaphorical death, but the actual death of self that Kuma experienced when his personality was erased. Most stories would treat that as the end. The person is gone. The body is just a husk. There is nothing left to mourn except memories held by others. But Oda rejects that framework. He is saying that personhood is not solely a mental phenomenon. The body has its own knowledge, its own history, its own form of remembering that persists even when the mind is destroyed. Kuma's body ran to Egghead because running to Bonney was what Kuma's body had always done. It was the default state, the natural condition, the thing the flesh knew how to do even when the brain had forgotten why. And then the body arrives, crashes through the chaos of the Egghead battle, like a meteor made of grief and cybernetics, finds Bonney, finds Saturn. And for one moment, one terrible, beautiful moment, the empty shell does something that should be impossible. It interposes itself between Saturn and Bonney. It raises its arms in a defensive posture. It protects its daughter the way it protected her when she was a baby, when she was sick, when the whole world wanted her dead and only her father stood in the way. Saturn's reaction is everything. The Five Elder, this ancient monster who has been running the world since before recorded history, looks at PX0 with something approaching confusion. This was not supposed to happen. This cannot happen. The programming explicitly prevents independent action. The personality erasure was complete. There is nothing left of Bartholomew Kuma that could motivate this behavior. And yet, here stands the proof that Saturn was wrong, that the world government was wrong, that you cannot kill love by killing the lover. The body they bought and broke and enslaved is defending the one person it was never supposed to remember. Bonney watches her father's corpse stand between her and death, and she understands. Finally, completely, she understands what Kuma gave her. Not just memories in a bubble. Not just his body as a temporary shield. He gave her proof that love is stronger than death. He gave her evidence that the connection between parent and child cannot be severed by violence or science or 800 years of governmental conspiracy. He gave her hope, the same hope he gave to the children in God Valley, the same hope he preached about in the church, the same hope that sustained the Buccaneer race through centuries of persecution. Nika is coming. Joy Boy lives. And even the dead will rise to protect the people they love. The Running Man sequence is not just a plot point. It is the thematic climax of Kuma's entire story. Everything he suffered, everything he sacrificed, everything he lost, it all leads to this moment. A father standing in front of his daughter, facing down a god, with nothing but an empty body and a love that refused to die. This is what the Tyrant was protecting. This is what the Saint believed in. This is the answer to the question that Saturn never thought to ask. What happens when you try to destroy something that was never yours to destroy in the first place? The body stands. Saturn attacks. And the final chapter of Bartholomew Kuma's story begins to write itself in blood and fire, and the defiant hope of everyone who ever believed that tomorrow could be better than today. So where does this leave us? Where does this leave Bonney, standing in the wreckage of Egghead with her father's memories burned into her brain and her father's body crumbling in front of her? Where does this leave the narrative of One Piece, now that fictional pirate creator man has revealed the full scope of a tragedy he has been building for over 600 chapters? And where does this leave us, the audience, the people who have spent 2 hours listening to me talk about a fictional pirate and his fictional daughter and why their fictional suffering matters? Let me start with Bonney, because Bonney is the future, and the future is what Kuma died for. The current manga has made it increasingly clear that Bonney is being positioned as a permanent addition to the Straw Hat crew. Not officially yet, not with the Sark Cups and the Declaration, but the narrative architecture is unmistakable. She has a dream that aligns with Luffy's journey. She has a personal vendetta against the world government that makes her a natural ally. She has a devil fruit with combat applications that would complement the existing crew. And most importantly, she has inherited the will of Bartholomew Kuma, which means she carries within her the accumulated hope of the Buccaneer race and the faith of a man who believed in Nika before anyone else did. But here is what makes Bonney different from every other potential Straw Hat candidate. She is not joining as a fighter. Yes, she can fight. The Toshi Toshi no Mi is incredibly versatile, allowing her to manipulate ages and transform herself and others in ways that have obvious combat applications. But that is not her role. Bonney is joining as the memory keeper. She is joining as the living archive of everything the world government tried to erase. Every story Kuma told in the slave camps, every legend of Nika that the Buccaneers preserved through centuries of genocide, every moment of joy and suffering that defined her father's life, all of it lives inside her now. She is not just a pirate. She is a library. She is proof that history cannot be destroyed as long as one person remembers it. This connects to the broader themes of One Piece in ways that I find deeply satisfying. The Void Century is coming. The truth about the world, the secret that the world government has killed millions to protect, is going to be revealed before the manga ends. And when it is revealed, when Robin finally reads the Rio poneglyph and learns what actually happened 800 years ago, Bonney will be there. She will be there with memories that predate the Void Century cover-up, with oral traditions passed down through generations of Buccaneers, with context that no poneglyph can provide because it was never written down. Bonney is not just Kuma's legacy, she is the legacy of everyone who ever resisted the world government's version of history. She is the counter-narrative made flesh. And what about Kuma himself? What happens to the body after Egghead? The manga has not given us a definitive answer yet, and I am hesitant to speculate too wildly, because Oda has a habit of subverting expectations in ways that make theorists look foolish. But I will say this. Kuma's story is not over. It cannot be over. A body that ran across oceans on the power of love alone does not simply stop being narratively relevant. Whether Kuma is somehow restored, whether his personality returns through some mechanism we do not yet understand, or whether he dies permanently and his body finally rests, the conclusion has to match the weight of what came before. Fictional pirate creator man has invested too much in this tragedy to let it end with a whimper. My personal hope, and this is pure emotional cockery with no evidentiary basis whatsoever, is that Bonney finds a way to return her father's memories. The Nikyu no Mi can push abstract concepts. It pushed Kuma's memories out. Perhaps, with enough understanding of how the fruit works, those memories can be pushed back in. It would be the ultimate reversal of Saturn's cruelty. The weapon restored to personhood. The slave reclaiming his identity. The father remembering his daughter's name. I do not know if Oda will go this route. I do not know if it is even possible within the rules of the story, but I want it. I want Kuma to wake up. I want him to see that Bonney survived, that she grew up strong, that she found the sun god he spent his whole life believing in. I want him to know that his sacrifice meant something. But even if that never happens, even if Kuma remains an empty shell until the end of the series, his story is still complete. Because the measure of a life is not whether you survive it. The measure of a life is what you leave behind. And Kuma left behind everything. He left behind a daughter who carries his memories and his faith. He left behind a crew of straw hats who are alive because he saved them. He left behind a revolutionary army that he helped found and that continues fighting the battle he started. He left behind a legend, the legend of the Tyrant who was secretly a saint, the monster who was secretly the kindest man in the world. That legend will outlive the world government. That legend will outlive Saturn and the Five Elders and the celestial dragons and everyone who ever tried to suppress the truth. Kuma won. He just did not live to see it. And that brings us back to where we started over 2 hours ago, when I told you that I needed to talk to you about a lie. The lie that Bartholomew Kuma was a villain. The lie that the Tyrant epithet meant anything true about who he was. The lie that the world government successfully broke a man when all they actually did was turn him into a symbol of everything they fear. We believed that lie for 600 chapters. We looked at Kuma and saw a monster because that is what we were designed to see. And now we know better. Now we know that every appearance, every action, every moment of apparent villainy was actually a father protecting his daughter and a believer serving his God. The Tyrant was a lie. The saint was the truth. And the truth, as it always does in One Piece, has finally come to light. Bartholomew Kuma is the saddest story in One Piece history. Not because he suffered more than anyone else, though he certainly suffered enough. Not because his ending is tragic, though it is among the most tragic things Oda has ever written. He is the saddest story because he chose it. Every step of the way, from God Valley to Egghead, Kuma had opportunities to save himself. He could have abandoned the other slaves. He could have left the revolutionary army. He could have refused Vegapunk's deal and let Bonney die. He could have been selfish just once and spared himself decades of pain. But he never did. He chose sacrifice every single time. He chose love over survival, hope over safety, his daughter's future over his own existence. And that choice, repeated across 40 years of suffering, is what makes his story not just sad, but sacred. Kuma believed in Nika. He believed that one day a liberator would come to free the world from tyranny. And because he believed, he spent his entire life preparing for that liberation, even knowing he would never see it himself. That is faith. That is love. That is the answer to the question of what makes a person truly good in a world designed to crush goodness out of existence. You keep believing anyway. You keep sacrificing anyway. You keep running toward hell so that someone else can live in the sun. The Tyrant was a lie. The saint who ran to hell was the truth. And now you know his story. But you let me know what you think in the comments. And please do subscribe to this channel for consistent injections of One Piece culture administered directly into your YouTube feed.